Hi, and welcome to the Leo Dotson Show. I'm your host, Leo Dotson. Tonight's topic, the U.S. energy policy. All of the above. What does that mean? Well, if we look at energy experts, they would tell us that that's a great slogan, but there's not much evidence of a policy to back it up. They would also tell you that that's nothing new, that we really haven't had a comprehensive U.S. energy policy since prior to 1973's OPEC oil embargo. And that's unfortunate because the U.S. has two distinct competitive advantages in the realm of energy. First, we have vast fossil fuels that are both abundant and inexpensive. Of course, there are environmental issues to go along with those sources of coal, oil, and natural gas. The second advantage is promising technology for the future of renewable energy sources like solar and wind, geothermal, and hydroelectric. Unfortunately, the technology for mass rollout is still probably a decade or so away, depending on which estimate that you look at. And today, in the final quarter of 2012, all renewables combined account for less than 9% of our total U.S. energy needs. So clearly, there's a gap. And to abruptly stop all fossil fuels right now would have a major impact on the economy and jobs. If we look at the debate going around in those circles of the energy field, we see extremists on either side arguing very stark points. One side would say that we need to use exclusively fossil fuels, the other saying that we need to immediately start using 100% renewables. So to examine that debate, let's take a quick look at a representative of each fuel source from each category. We'll use coal since it's the most abundant and inexpensive fossil fuel, and solar because most experts believe amongst renewables that is absolutely our best long-term alternative. Coal, for example, presents almost half of the U.S. energy electrical generation. It's the least expensive source we have. Coal production is about 1/6 that of oil and natural gas per BTU. It's much less expensive for consumers as well. Did you know that consumers who use non-coal generated electricity pay 56% more for their electricity than consumers who use coal generated electricity? Also, coal is responsible for over 500,000 jobs. Coal is our #1 independent energy source. In fact, the U.S. has the largest, not just total, but recoverable reserves of any country in the world, equating 1/4 of the entire world's coal supply. That's the energy equivalent of 1 trillion barrels of oil, or the entire world's oil supply. And unlike oil, coal comes with no foreign reliance and no national security threats. Obviously, though, coal is not without its problems. Much of the CO2 emissions in the atmosphere come from the burning of coal and other fossil fuels. But there has been progress made in recent years. In fact, over the last 40 years, coal-generated electricity is up 180%, yet CO2 emissions are down 80%. Now, that's not exclusively due to reduction in coal emissions. That's been an across-the-board cut due to intelligent regulations. Regulations like the continued reduction of emissions from all fossil fuels. Also, land reclamation. Did you know that every coal mine, once it's finished mining, must be reclaimed to at least the equivalent of its natural beauty before mining commenced? And in fact, in many coal mining communities, the best lands are previous coal mines that have been reclaimed and are now beautiful areas for parks and recreation, usable housing, and even can be used for venues in the future for renewable plants such as solar or wind or geothermal. These are intelligent regulations. Another one forthcoming is the process of carbon capture and sequestration. Now, most experts would point out that it's probably about a decade away from full implementation, but it does represent the possibility for emission-free coal production. Those are all intelligent regulations and much needed regulations. Even most coal experts or industry experts would say that. But there are a lot of regulations put out by the EPA that don't make sense. And actually they're the brunt of the conversation by people in the coal industry that believe the EPA has a quote-unquote war on coal. Here's one example. Did you know that runoff water from coal mines, of course we want it to be non-pollutant, but the EPA mandates that coal mining water runoff must be cleaner than drinking water. Now, that mandate clearly does not exist for water around nuclear power plants or oil refineries. What about rainwater runoff from U.S. highways or the driveway at your home? That clearly has chemicals on the surface of oil and gas and other pollutants, and clearly is not as clean as drinking water. So why does the EPA mandate that coal water must be as clean as, or cleaner than drinking water, and significantly cleaner than drinking water? Doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's look at solar. Solar really is our best hope long term and really has some promising technology. Unfortunately, the ability to roll that technology out massively to everyone in the US is really just not available right now in 2012, and most experts think that that's at least a decade or two away as well. There's also some upfront cost in terms of collection, conversion, and storage of solar power that are rather steep in terms of the immediate investment. Coal right now is about 1/10 of 1% of our U.S. energy needs. In fact, as we said earlier, all renewables combined are less than 9%. So clearly there's a big gap between our energy needs and the ability for renewables to make an immediate impact today. But there is hope. Estimates show that by 2025, solar alone could produce 10% of our U.S. energy needs, and that's just a little over a decade away. And this solar energy would be completely clean, inexhaustible, and depending on how it's structured, would be very inexpensive or absolutely free. So what makes sense? I don't think either extreme is the way to go, and 100% either one. I think a balanced approach makes sense. But we need to have a real policy, not just a slogan. We need an energy policy that's comprehensive, intelligent, long-term, plausible, feasible plan that uses both fossil fuels and sustainable energy. Because to use fossil fuels alone and not move toward renewables is really not the best impact on our environment. But to immediately and abruptly use only only renewables would lead to a devastating effect on our economy with both job loss and spiraling energy costs that we really can't afford. So we need to use both brown and green sources of energy. What would that energy policy look like? Well, first of all, I think we would want to institute intelligent regulations to make our power sources cleaner, to continue to reduce emissions, and to improve technology both for fossil fuels and renewables to make them more environmentally friendly. But we really need to immediately get rid of unnecessary regulations like making water runoff from coal cleaner than drinking water. I would also advocate that we put in incentives for the private sector and the free market, and we can have a three-tiered incentive in terms of priorities. Number one priority would be renewables, such as investitures and incentives in solar, wind, geothermal, and hydroelectric. Number two would be to continue the effort in cleaning up fossil fuels such as clean coal and natural gas. And thirdly, to make nuclear power safer, maybe by the addition of thorium as it replaces fission and fusion. Really, we don't need to look at history for very long to realize we cannot endure another 3 Mile Island incident or Chernobyl or most recent environmental disaster in Fukushima, Japan. Let's also look at a marriage between the private sector and the government to have a comprehensive, coordinated energy policy that makes sense. Right now, research money from our government, taxpayer dollars from you and me, we spend $80 billion per year in military research. In other words, new ways to wage war. We spend $30 billion on health research. Yet we only spend $5 billion on energy policy research or energy research, and that affects every single American as well as our economic viability and our national security. I think we would look at a replace and reuse philosophy as well, or the 4 R's as I like to call them. What if we, for every single trade-off, we had a 1-for-1 replacement? For example, for every kilowatt of fossil fuels that we reduced, we would replace that with 1 kilowatt of renewables, and we wouldn't reduce that until that replacement was there and viable. We could also retrain energy workers in the fossil fuels, such as coal miners, hardworking, productive, skilled workers in the energy sector that could be retrained to work in the renewable sector, such as solar or geothermal or wind or hydroelectric, at equal pay, so that we're not losing jobs or hurting our economy. And also that very land that used to be used for fossil fuels could now be then used for renewable sources as well. We need to have energy sources, both fossil fuels and renewables, that are at once abundant, inexpensive, and independent from foreign sources. And lastly, our energy policy must consider 4 important factors: the cost, both of production and consumption, economic viability, national security, and environmental friendliness.